My name is David Bernstein. I am the political writer for the Boston Phoenix. I've been a reporter for over 20 years, and I've been with the Boston Phoenix covering politics, specifically in Massachusetts, as well as nationally and locally, for 9 years. And I've been covering Mitt Romney very closely and writing about him and about his history at Bain and as a governor and as a national campaigner that whole time. I think that it's less to do with anything specific that he thinks is in there. I think that he is genuinely sort of offended by the notion that anyone gets to look at his tax returns. I think that Mitt Romney, he's a very secretive and he's very protective of his brand, and has been since he was a kid. I mean, he's always been building this brand for his eventual public life, and crafts it very meticulously, truthful or not truthful, whatever is best for that brand that he wants to build. And I think that there are certain things along the way that he makes decisions about, and in this particular case with his tax returns and how he does his taxes. My guess is that he made a decision a long time ago when he realized how his taxes were going to look and had to be done, that he made a decision. I can do one of two things. I can put my accountant to work doing the taxes the way they should be done at the maximum, utilization of all the breaks that are available to me, which would look very bad to my public career sometime, but I'll just make sure nobody sees that. Or I can figure that I'll need to show it to them sometime, so I'll direct my accountants to be more circumspect and have and do my taxes in a more publicly, accessible way that would look not so bad. And I think he just made a decision. No, I'm going to do my taxes the way that I want to do them, and I'll never let anyone see them. And he never has. When he's run before and when he's run now. At least. He didn't release his taxes when he ran for governor in 2002. There was a clamor for it at the time, both by his opponent, Democratic opponent, and from some people in the press. He did his required financial disclosures, but not his tax returns. And he didn't, again, during the 2008 campaign. And he didn't again during this campaign, and of course become a very big issue during this campaign. All he's released is most of or much of this year's, the 2011 return, and he's promised to release some of, we don't know how much of, his next return, which we'll have very little time to go through before the election. Mitt Romney's relationship in his mind with his father, I think, is a fascinating one that is going to be for the ages and for the biographers, and it's different on different issues. It comes through differently. So on this particular issue of the tax returns, it's very interesting that, of course, George Romney set the standard. He was the one who released 12 years, who said if you only release one or two, that could be deliberately set up so that it looks good for the public. And obviously Mitt Romney is rejecting that very clearly, and publicly rejecting what his father said was the right thing to do. And I think in this case, the way I read it, again, you're getting into the psychoanalysis of, little Willard Mitt's daddy issues. But in this case, I think that Mitt, in analyzing how his father did politics, his father did politics in a sort of do-goody kind of sense, that you do business one way, you have to be a little ruthless in business because that's the business world, but politics is a public service and campaigning is a public service that that you have to do in as public and as good a way as possible. You take principled stands, you walk out of the Republican convention if the party's not going the way you want it to. And I think that Mitt Romney may have begun his political career that way when he first began to run in 1994, and then he ran up against the Ted Kennedy machine, which plays very tough hardball in politics, in campaigning, and I think that surprised Mitt. And from what people say around him, I don't know that it's true, but I believe it, that Mitt sort of came away from that campaign realizing that a campaign has to be waged the way you wage business and the way you market in business and the way you do a corporate takeover in business and so forth, and that he has applied that to everything since, and that's something that he, in his mind, really deliberately and consciously breaks from his father on. Mitt Romney's saga of how he ends up being a Massachusetts guy is an interesting one. He starts out as a Michigan guy who starts off in college in California, but doesn't like Stanford because it's too 60s, too new, he's a guy who is very brought up, which is very common, and I don't mean this in any negative way, very common among a certain sort of upper middle class Mormon household culture. And I'm not talking about the religious culture, but I talked to many people who tell me about that culture over the years. It's very much everyone eats dinner together as a family. You do the right things. You wear your hair the right length. You serve the church a certain way, and you go to the right schools. You do the right things in the right order. And that was really the way he approached things. Mitt Romney, he goes to Stanford, but it didn't really work for him, so he transfers to BYU. Much more, everyone follows the directions here, but it's still the right kind of school. And then you're going to go into business, so you go to Harvard and you get a joint MBA and law degree. It's a very Mitt Romney, by the books. Also something, by the way, that a lot of his contemporaries among Mormons were doing. And he has a lot of sort of contemporaries, in and around his age who went through Harvard Business School and ended up in the business consulting world. And he, of course, goes into the right business in that sense. He goes to work for Boston Consulting, who hires him, recruits him right out of Harvard. So that's how he ends up initially being a Massachusetts guy. And then he gets recruited away from them to join Bain Consulting, which is there in Boston. He settles down in Belmont, sort of the right kind of suburban upper-class neighborhood there in Boston. Becomes very active and involved in the church there, the Mormon church. Helps to grow that Mormon church. Helps get a new temple built in Belmont, right where he lives. Grows the community there. Then, I think that he really reaches a point right around 1990, early 90s, that he really feels like he's made the money that he needs to make, and he wants to do the public service part of doing the right thing with his life. And I think it's genuine with him. I really do. And so he starts thinking that way, starts building his public image that way, runs for Senate, has his one great failure in his life. And at that point, he starts trying to rethink, how do I rebuild from here? And first he pours that energy back into Bain Capital. It's at exactly the right time when the stock market is soaring, so all those deals make him and his partners a tremendous amount of money. So he has sort of the freedom to do whatever he wants. So at that point, he gets lured out of Massachusetts by this unique opportunity where his people, his family and friends and so on out in Utah have the Winter Olympic Games, a very high-profile public good that they need help with. So he at that point sort of finagles to get them to pick him to come in and be the savior, and they end up picking him over John Huntsman, his future competitor in the presidential campaign this year, and he goes and saves the day there. And it was very much talked about, back in Massachusetts in political circles and in national circles and certainly in Utah circles, it was talked about what is his game plan politically. And there's no question that was, he says over and over and over again, he never thought of politics when he was, taking the Winter Olympics job. Everyone knows that's not true. It's been reported that it's not true by others as well as me. So the question was, what is it going to be? And he really was torn between coming back to Massachusetts and running there in Utah. And there were openings coming up in Utah. The generally understood and believed, consensus on that is that he was planning to rebuild his career in Utah. And that was why he started hedging a little bit more at that time towards a pro-life position, because there's no way that a Republican is ever going to get elected to anything with the abortion and gay rights rhetoric that he had been using just a few years earlier in Massachusetts. So he does a little bit more. He starts really defining himself pro-life to a couple of newspapers and reporters out there. But then this opportunity sort of comes out of nowhere in Massachusetts, in a sense, because there was a governor's race coming up in 2000, but Paul Cellucci had been the sitting governor and was expected to run again, and that's in the party, Republican Party. Then Cellucci decides he's done. He takes an ambassadorship to Canada, and his lieutenant governor, Jane Swift, takes over. So now you've got an acting governor of his own party heading into a re-election. You're not expected to go and take a shot at her, except that there were a lot of people who thought that she was a weak candidate. There were a lot of problems that she was having, sort of public relations problems. And there was a real sense among some people, who were trying to recruit Romney to come back to Massachusetts, that the party needed him back in Massachusetts. And he felt that was the better opportunity for him, and moved himself and Ann back to Massachusetts to do that run.